Right, we are live. Hi everybody. I hope everybody's having a really good day. I'm jumped on now to go through a paper that I've been reading, right, which is regarding grounding, right, it's entitled Grounding, the Universal Anti-Inflammatory Remedy. And I think this is important and beneficial for people because when we're talking about inflammation, we're talking about health problems. Inflammation is associated to essentially all the health problems, right, and illness. And for example, I come from a medical background, right? And when they take a blood sample, they check your CRP levels, which was considered a marker of inflammation in the body, right? And inflammation is a marker, but it's still an effect of a cause. In this live, we're going to talk about what the causes of inflammation. But as I've said, this paper, grounding, earthing, could be the most powerful anti-inflammatory remedy of all. And we're going to dig into that as well, because what is grounding? What is earthing? We're going to go through this paper together in regards to what the science is saying about it, right? The benefits of earthing and grounding, which is considered generally, if we want to perceive earthing and grounding as they do in this study, right, is to take off your shoes and go barefoot on the earth, right? Your skin touching the crust of the earth and absorbing what is called negative ions, negative ionization, that then create an open circuit for your body to let go of the positive ionization. Even though it's called positive, that's the ionization that's not good for you. And to bring that supply of negative ionization into the body, which then creates that anti-inflammatory effect. Now, when I say positive ionization, it's not the ionization or energy that's good for you. Well, a lot of our appliances give off positive ionization, like, for example, a dryer, a clothes dryer, right? So when you put your clothes in the dryer, right, and then you get them out, there's a lot of static on the clothes. That's positive. That's a buildup of positive ionization. A lot of the times when all of a sudden you're touching things and you get a shock, that is showcasing you've got a buildup of positive ionization. Okay, and positive ionization is pro-inflammation, negative ionization, which you get from earthing and grounding, an anti-inflammatory effect. So anyway, now, the way I'm going to go about this is a paper that's, let's see, it's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's about 5-6 pages long, which is not bad for a paper, actually. But what I want to demonstrate is how I would interpret this with what I provide in healing, and the healing sessions, the reality coaching sessions. We're going to essentially break down a paper of so many pages long into just a few concepts, a few terms, right? Because the thing about truly holistic is we like to go straight to the cause and remedies the cause of the effect, right? And we can only remedy something if we have a greater understanding and knowing of what we're trying to remedy, what the very thing is that we're experiencing. Okay. Otherwise, we're just playing around with the effect without remedying the cause, right? Which a lot of conventional modalities seem fine and dandy doing, right? And this is why I had to leave modern medicine, because I couldn't be around that. There had to be more. There had to be better. So every kind of worked in modern medicine as an orthopedic medical nurse, got into nutrition, and again, I didn't like that either. There was just a lot of BS really involved with that. So anyway, let's get into it. Now, one thing I will mention about negative ionization you get from grounding, right? So being in connection with the earth, right? As the human, our home is the earth, right? Now, the further we go up into the atmosphere, so go thousands of kilometers up in the sky, right? And then go beyond that, right, into what is known as space. What we find is there's a buildup of more positive ionization. And you rapidly demineralize. Your body rapidly demineralizes and degenerates. Right? So that would imply that what is best for our physiology, our body, our health, is to remain in connection with the earth. Why I find this interesting is because there's so much finance and effort and time and exploration in regards to what is out in space and beyond the earth, when really we already have the indications already of what we need and what is required of us, which is not that way, but connecting more with the earth, right? What people say is Mother Earth. Now, in my work, we've found that we have a synergistic connection with the earth from our heart. The heart has a synergistic symbiotic relationship with the earth. And what's interesting about that is our natural state of being, this is why we're called human beings, is when we are living from our heart. Right? I did a post just before regarding heart disease being the number one killer of humans. It's been that way for decades. And the heart is our home that we carry everywhere we go. And I sort of put on that post. So what is that telling us? And what it's telling us is that we're not in our hearts. And hence that's why heart disease is so prevalent. Right? Because when we're not in our heart, we experience more unease, which is to feel uncomfortable. Right? What's stress and overwhelm? Unease. Just like inflammation, what's connected to every illness we know? Overwhelm and stress, because that's an unregulated nervous system, meaning it imbalances your physiology. Okay. So, as the human, we get taught to become thinkers. Right? The very curriculum in becoming what the world needs us to be, right? To be a member of this club we call humanity, is to become thinkers, which means that our primary discernment is to think about everything. It's use thought, mind mentality. And when we're existing from here and we're experiencing, perceiving, processing, which means to respond and react to our experience, our life from here, we're not in the heart. Right? Which means that we're not presenting our natural state. It keeps us in balance. And we're not connected to what we are and who we are authentically. So that means we're not connected to who we are. And it also means that we lose our innate connection with the earth. And this is very important. Because as I say, it's the heart. Our natural state connecting with the natural state of the earth, which we call nature. Right? We're in the mind, we don't present our natural state, right? Which means that we're already providing a state that is pro-inflammation, not anti-inflammatory. Pro-inflammation. And we don't align with the natural state of the earth, which is called nature. This is why when people go into nature, then they feel amazing. Why? Because for once, they're actually presenting their natural state. It's a remembrance of you getting back in your heart. Okay, what I want you to keep that in your awareness as I go through this paper, because we're going to utilize that information and we're going to associate and connect it to the relevance of what this paper shows, and particularly with the cardiovascular system with blood, these things, okay? As I say, heart disease, #1 killer of humans. Been like that for decades, okay? So let's get into it. Right, so this paper was actually done by a cardiologist. His name was Dr. Sinatra, Stephen Sinatra. And paper's called The Universal Anti-Inflammatory Remedy, grounding, right? And so what it says here to begin with, it goes, inflammation is defined as a localized response to trauma or infection. Okay, so that's interesting because trauma is a person or a part of your body that is conflicted. Okay. In truly holistic, we talk about when we are a mindful mentality, we create duality, and duality is made of two opposing polarities, okay, that are warring with each other, which is conflict, okay? As I mentioned, right, when we're not presenting our natural state from here and we're up here, we are forging an experience, an environment that's called duality that creates conflict within the body. Right? We're conflicted with who we are because we're not connected to who we are, our home, our heart. We're up here. And that very environment, that state is reflected in our physiology. Right? So that means overwhelm, that means stress, that means an unregulated nervous system. That means lymph, blood losing its ability to flow. We'll get into that in a minute in regards to things like blood pressure. Right? It also means things like autoimmune conditions, right? When all of a sudden the processes of the body's working against you, right? Rheumatoid arthritis, when all of a sudden your immune system is attacking its own connective tissue, its own joints. That's a body that's in conflict, okay? Now it says infection because when it comes to infection, right, the body is a host to microbes, okay? And we have a role to be a host to those microbes, right? So those microbes and everything that's physical is an energy, right? It's a consciousness. And our wellness or vitality of our body is a synergistic symbiotic relationship, not only between us and the earth, but ourselves and the microbes that are on and in the body, right? They've got to work together, right? You're a host to support an environment for the microbes to evolve consciously as an energy. And then the microbes then, as scratch your back, scratch mine, will support the wellness and vitality of the body, right? Now, again, when we create and we exist up here, which is not to present our natural state of being, forging duality, right? We've just talked about a duality, a polarity example there, right? The body and the microbes. And duality is not to bring those two together, it's to break it apart, where the microbes are doing their own thing and not working for the body, and the body's not supporting the microbes by providing an environment as a host to support its evolvement. And we call that fermentation, which is simply an imbalanced microbial process. And what we find that truly holistic, when that's in play, we get what is called an infection, but more importantly, a byproduct of that is inflammation. Again, inflammation is a byproduct of not presenting your natural state. Okay, and we're going to come to how your natural state, being in the heart, is directly connected to what we call earthing and grounding. That is your original ground, right? As I mentioned, we have a synergistic symbiotic relationship with the earth, with our heart, not our brain, not our mind, the heart, okay? So let's keep going. I've highlighted a few things because I don't want to go through it all. Don't need to. Okay. Now, one thing I must say about papers, right? Double-blind clinical studies. I've read a lot over the years. Is that when you read the conclusion of it, it's always, we observe this, we observe that. I know I'm simplifying it, which is observation, but then it will follow that up by, we don't know why it's doing that. It may mean this, it might mean this. That's what it's always. There's always a may, there's always a maybe, there's always a might. Now, what that means is we're observing this, but we don't know why that's happening, why I'm observing it, which means that there's a lack of understanding or knowing of what is being observed. Now, I was talking to a client today and I was saying, we live in a world with infinite sources of information. Predominantly thanks to the internet. But humanity is more conflicted and confused than it's ever been, which tells me that we don't need more sources of information. We need a greater level of understanding and knowing of what it means and what it represents. Okay. And we've got all these studies being done in the sector of modern medicine and science that showcases a lack of understanding or knowing of what they're observing as part of their study. Okay. And what that tells me is knowing comes from being in our heart more. Okay. Because the heart is connected to the expression to get to the heart of the matter. Right? There's no expression, right? Get to the heart of the matter. What that means is just to get to the core of it, the origin of it, which we could associate to getting to the cause of it. Okay. And as I said earlier, to get to the cause of something, we need to understand it, what we're dealing with more. Okay. And sadly, we're taught to become thinkers, and we're up here, which is really making us use and be confined to limitation instead of expanding our horizons in regards to our level of understanding and knowing of what we're experiencing. And that's what the heart brings that. So realize that, many avenues, not just inflammation or heart disease problems, but at the core of it, we need the heart. We need people to be in their heart more. Okay? So, anyway, let's keep going. So it goes here in regards to earthing and grounding. It goes, earthing or grounding, the body is having a direct contact with the natural electric charge of the earth, right? Electrons. And we believe this natural anti-inflammatory is the non-pharmaceutical therapy of choice. Right. Now, this is the interesting thing. Are you hearing this on the news? Because this is the most available anti-inflammatory we have. All right, we live on the earth, literally. And it's free. But we don't hear about this. This is something that you can provide to yourself all the time. Now, where I take that even further here at Truly Holistic is I realize that, hey, we can't be hugging trees all day or taking our shoes off and going barefoot in the earth all day. We've got jobs, right? We may live in a apartment building that you're on the 3rd level. I understand that. So my job is how do we sustain our natural state, right? To be in our heart, which is called a state of being. And this is what we teach at Truly Holistic, right? So you don't have to rely on getting barefoot on the earth. You can provide it wherever you are. Your natural state, an anti-inflammatory state to the body, right? And this is what we teach. And it's not through complicating your situation more, it's about simplifying it. Because as I say, greater understanding and knowing means healing. Simplifying means healing. Okay? Because generally life at its core is simple. It's just we use mind, thought, mentality as a process of perceiving that complicates what is simple at its core. And out of that complication, we get overwhelmed, and overwhelm means stress, right? And that means inflammation to the body. We're no longer grounded. We're no longer earthed. We're no longer connected to our home, the home that we carry with us, which is our own heart, which humanity is not getting, right? Because heart disease is the number one killer of humans. Heart disease wouldn't exist if we were in our natural state all the time, right? We wouldn't feel conflicted or confused about ourselves and wouldn't project that conflict out into the world if we lived and existed in the heart. Okay. Anyway, let's keep going. Okay. So here it goes. Such as, I mentioned about this earthing effect is electrons, right? The natural electrical charge, which we can call negative ions, when conducted to the human body, result in favorable, right? So putting the odds in your favor, result in favorable and physiological changes. Previous research has demonstrated attenuation of the inflammatory response, right? So it's having an effect on that, right, in regards to removing that. A decreased red blood cell RBC aggregation, which is talking about, hang on, look at this. Improve heart rate variability and a favorable impact on blood viscosity. So what they're really emphasizing there is its effect on blood, which is obviously in aligned with heart disease. Okay. Anyway, let's move on because we'll get into that a little bit more. Now, when it comes to the word viscosity, viscosity means the thickness of your blood, right? So thick blood means inflamed blood, right? So I always love to mention a study they did where they took a blood sample of a whole bunch of people that had their shoes on, right? And they hadn't been in contact with the earth. And of course, the autopilot mode for the human is to live from the mind. So therefore, they're not in their hearts, so they're not grounded or earthed. And they take their blood sample, all right? And then they go and get them to be earthed for half an hour, 40 minutes, right? Getting their feet on the earth. And then they take another blood sample. So the first blood sample, when they were not grounded, what it shows is a lot of the red blood cells had lost its negative ionized charge, which means the negative ions is what creates the anti-inflammatory effect in the body, right? When you ground, you absorb those negative ions from the earth, right? So what they found with that first blood sample was that a lot of the red blood cells were all stacked on top of a red blood cell, right? Like poker chips. Now, what that meant was there was very few red blood cells that still held that negative ionized charge, and all the other red blood cells won it because they innately know what's good for them, right? And that negative charge is what allows the red blood cell, right, to keep its vortex, its spin rate, right? We're getting into a term called zeta potential. Okay. Now, when it's clumped like that, that's thick blood. The blood has lost its flow. Okay. Now, when we're talking about flow, we're starting to get into things like blood pressure problems, right? Because blood pressure is a regulation of flow. Okay. So whether you got high blood pressure or low blood pressure, it means that your blood represents an imbalanced state, meaning you are not in your natural state that provides balance to the body. You're up here. This is why, many doctors, before putting you on a antihypertensive medication, right, to lower your blood pressure, will ask you, are you stressed at the moment? Is there a lot of stress in your life? Why? Because where does that overwhelmed stress come from? From simplifying your life or making it more complicated? More complicated, right? Which is the process of mind-thought mentality, right? It's not being in your natural state. Okay. So how does this then affect the body? Well, it affects the body because blood is what transports oxygen to your tissues, right? And also nutrients. So what actually happens is the intelligence of the body, thankfully it does this. It increases the pressure in the blood, right? So it pushes that blood around the body because the body needs that. It needs the oxygenation. It needs the nutrients that are carried by the blood. Okay. But the question we must be asking, why does it need to do that? Why does it need to intervene and do that? And why it needs to do it is because we're not providing our body a natural state. Right? Because, yes, all the red blood cells are stacked like poker chips. Right? But when they grounded those people, right, the same people that showed those results in their blood for half an hour on the ground, and then they took a blood sample after that, all the red blood cells were free floating. They weren't stacked on top of each other because they were all happy because they all had that negative ionized charge. And what that meant was the viscosity of the blood wasn't thick anymore, it was thin because the blood's capacity to flow was improved, where before it was compromised. Okay. Now, what we've got to understand that is all illness, of course we're focusing on cardiovascular issues here, but across the board in regards to all illness, it's caused by either a congestion, obstruction, blockage to flow. Flow's that important. And what I'm talking about is energy flow, because it's the foundation and baseline for everything, right? If I go through the layers of let's say we start at cellular level. The cellular level is only as good as the atomic and particle level. And then what sits under there, which is the baseline of all existence, is simply a waveform, and that's frequencies, which is energy. Right? So whatever happens with that waveform, whether it's flowing or not, gets permeated through those levels into your perceived physical experience through your body. Okay? So the most important thing we need to be providing for our wellness and vitality is to present our own natural state. That's the most important thing you can do. It's way more important than what you eat and what you drink. Okay. So when all the red blood cells get that negative ionized charge, right, which is associated with grounding, earthing, each red blood cell, its spin rate increases. Now that's a vortex, and vortex is the form or geometry of flow itself. Okay. And when something gets a vortex, it forms two forces, centripetal, centrifugal force, which is two forces that push what is not beneficial for the cell out from the center of itself to the outer part of itself, right, to purge it out, which is cleansing, right? And then bring in what is needed for that red blood cell. What we're talking about there, we're talking about a self-regulating process of cleansing and detoxification that you provide your body when you simply present your natural state, right? And why that's important is because you're not needing to provide something out of an act of doing just through facilitating your natural state. The body's taking care of itself. It's self-regulating, which implies the body knows what to do. It just requires the correct state and environment, and that's your job, which is out of being, not doing, being, right? So have we overcomplicated the whole process of what it means to try and be well and vital? Yes. Big yes with that, okay? And why? Because of what we're using to interpret the process, mind, thought, mentality. Okay? Out of thinking, out of evaluating, out of compartmentalization, like testings, right? Non-continuous testing, diagnostics, will never get us, our body, to where we can by just simply presenting our natural state. Okay? And no one's talking about it. Even people, a lot of practitioners in my field do not talk about it. Right? They talk about clearing work. But why we have to do clearing work all the time is because we're allowing that accumulation and build-up, that congestion to begin with. Where if we can get that greater insight and knowing of presenting our natural state, which keeps everything flowing, we don't build up to begin with. We don't create attachments to begin with, meaning we don't need to keep do clearing work. A self-regulating process. Because if we look at water in nature, water is the physical embodiment of flow. When we look at water moving in nature, right, as it moves, it doesn't just move like that, it's vortexing. And as it moves, and water loves to move, that's what it wants to do. And as it keeps moving, it doesn't have to think about cleansing itself or trying to do something to make itself healthy. Because through the act of what it loves to provide, right, to keep moving, keep flowing, it's providing itself a self-regulating cleansing and detoxification process, not out of doing. Doesn't that sound a lot more simple? Because it is, you know, and that is really the true way to heal. Okay. Now, why I'm going to really emphasize, the zeta potential, right? The spin rate of each red blood cell. Why that's important. Obviously, it's allowing that the blood to detoxify itself, right? To keep itself clean, right? But also, another cleansing process for you women out there is menstruation. And that's to do with blood too, isn't it? Right? So, this is this aspect that the body is trying to find its balance. It's trying to provide its balance. It's trying to provide flow. Like, if you come down with a cold, that's something intervening to try and get your body in a state of being, of balance, of flow again. Because you've just been doing, working, getting overwhelmed and stressed, right? How many times you ask somebody, oh, you got a cold, and you find out, okay, they've just been so busy and overwhelmed, and it's led to them getting a cold, right? What's overwhelmed stress? Not providing your natural state. It's being up here a lot. This doesn't support the body, okay? It doesn't support the process in you being here, to fulfill your purpose in being here, which would be associated to a spiritual term we call ascension. But that process of ascension, your process of maintaining wellness and vitality for the body, is the same one. It's the same journey. It's the same process. Okay. But what I was going to say about, the vortex of each red blood cell, where that's important is diabetes, which is also associated to cardiovascular disease, right? Heart disease, right? They're like that. Because what are we looking at in regards to diabetes? I'm generally talking about non-insulin dependent diabetes, type 2 diabetes, because type 1's are a little bit different, is the body's ability to push the blood sugar, right, the sugar in the blood into the cell so it can be utilized as energy, right? Now, which is called insulin sensitivity, because insulin is secreted by the pancreas to drive that sugar into the cell, right? But let's say the cell is congested, right? It's toxic. The blood's toxic. The blood's thick, right? Because you're not presenting your natural state. The red blood cells don't have their own negative ionized charge. Then it's going to impact that sugar's ability to get through the membrane into the cell, right? Because it's also lost its flow. It's lost its vortex to self-regulate and keep it clean. And then all of a sudden the pancreas has to work hard and secrete more insulin because it's getting the message it's not doing the job to get that sugar into the cell. And then all of a sudden that becomes insulin resistance, which is known as diabetes, type 2 diabetes. All comes back to this, right? About presenting your natural state, which is associated to the science of grounding and earthing. Anyway, let's keep going. There was even studies done with COVID, right, which this paper shows, which is really interesting. So they found that where they use grounding patches, right, which mimic the ability to connect with the earth, right? So the grounding patch will be stuck to the person's chest with a cord and then connected to a grounding rod. They connect into the earth, right? And that's how it was used. Is when they use a grounding patch on this particular person's chest, it helped them immensely, right, in regards to COVID symptoms. Okay. Now, it also says in the patients that were grounded, the complication of blood clots, right, was not seen as opposed to the patients that were not grounded, right? So again, we're talking, this is an extension of what we were just talking about before, because a blood clot is due to thick blood. It's losing your flow, right? And we talked about earlier before, right? Heart disease, the number one killer that kills humans. And generally, how does it take someone out? A myocardial infarction, which is a heart attack. Now, do you have a heart attack because of a flow of blood to the heart? No. There's a lack of blood flow to the heart because there's an obstruction. Okay. People are getting heart attacks. What's also associated to a heart attack? Stress, being overwhelmed. Now, do we get overwhelmed and stressed when we simplify by living and being in our heart? No. We don't get overwhelmed or stressed. And what does this provide? Flow. Energy flow that then becomes blood flow. All the red blood cells have that increased spin rate that self-regulates its cleansing and keeps the blood clean and flowing. All comes back to your natural state. Okay? And Truly Holistic can teach you how to sufficiently and sustainably provide your natural state. Doesn't matter where you are and what you're doing. Okay? Let's keep going. So they concluded with the COVID-19 research that grounding demonstrated significant preventative as well as curative aspects in the treatment of COVID-19. Yeah. Now, what I'm going to share with myself is when COVID-19 was, COVID was at its was an absolute epidemic in this country, in New Zealand. There was if someone in your household was positive for COVID, then everyone had to go into isolation, right? And I remember that, my daughter got it first, and then her mother got it, and then my son got it, and I never got it. And it's not like I was separating myself from them by sitting in another room. I was working, but I was looking after the kids as well, who were sick at the time. Right, they were sneezing, they were coughing on me, right, up during the night if they couldn't sleep. right? So getting less sleep. But I knew how to facilitate my natural state. I wore products that I make that allows me and assists to keep my energy field nice and expansive, which is an indication that I'm facilitating the energy flow from my heart, which is to be in my natural state, right? So I had a very much a personal experience of essentially what this research is explaining. It also mentions these two communications demonstrates that grounding the human body may assist in not only the prevention of significant symptoms, but assistance in recovery from illness, right? For me, that's flow, right? For example, if somebody gets a cold, and you hear it everywhere, right? And people go, I got this cold, and a few weeks later, I still got it. Just won't. It's just, annoying. It's just hanging on. It's lingering. Now, why it's lingering is because you're getting in the way of the flowing process the body's trying to intervene and provide to you, because you believe when you got sick, I need to do something about it. Do, when really the act of doing and doing all the time is what led you to getting that cold to begin with. You don't need more doing, you need being. Okay? You're a human being that's never providing a state of being because you're doing all the time. Okay? And if you just allow, surrender, and forgive to that process, right? Drop in your heart and allow it to fulfill what it needs to do to bring flow back to the body. That cold won't linger. You allow it to come through and do what it needs to do and exit again as fast as possible. Okay? So, again, it's the aspect of being that every illness, every problem we have is always because of a lack of being. That's what we need. Not more doing. Being. Okay? It also says here, grounding helps to synchronize hormonal rhythms of the body, which is emphasizing balance. As I talk to my clients all the time, the body relies on balance, nothing more than hormones. Okay? Because what happens, right? How does a human get imbalanced? An unregulated nervous system through being up here, living up mind, thought, mentality, right? That allows the nervous system to become imbalanced, which then controls not only your emotional state, your choices, but your physiology, including your hormones. Okay? So, very interesting stuff. So let's keep going. Now we're going to talk about hypertension, which is high blood pressure. Okay? Now, in another study, it mentioned that all 10 patients reduced their blood pressure, and many were able to reduce their reliance on hypertensive blood pressure medication through grounding. Right? So that's being in contact with the earth, right? As I mentioned earlier, absorbing the negative ionization, right? That brings more blood flow through more energy flow, because what you're doing, what's negative ionization? Energy. Okay? So that provides more blood flow. And when there's more flow, there's more balance. And when there's balance, there's more flow. That's what the heart does. The heart brings balance. Okay? And what did I say about blood pressure? It's a regulation of flow, blood flow. And if you're not providing your natural state, a state of being in the heart, which is what brings balance, and you're up here, it's going to show itself through your physiology. And what is high blood pressure? An expression of imbalance, of flow. Okay? But what does modern medicine do? Oh, we've got to give you a medication or treat the effect. You've got high blood pressure, lower it. It's not working on the cause at all. Because that person will keep living from up here which is presenting that unbalanced state to the body, and then the body expresses that imbalance. And if it doesn't get to you through your understanding of having high blood pressure, it'll find another way in your body that shows an imbalance of balance. Like, for example, thyroid function. Hyper or hypo, which is high or low function of the thyroid. What's that? Again, a regulating process showing an imbalanced state you're presenting your body. You're not providing your natural state. Right? So we don't even need to go into the realm of, what supplements, what foods I should be eating, or what a medication I need to take for that. Just go back to the foundation of what you need to provide your body, which is to simply provide its natural state, a state of being. Right? A cosmic joke. Human beings, but we don't know how to be because we don't get taught to do that, because we get taught to be thinkers, which means not to be in our heart, but be in our heads, which is mind, thought, mentality. Okay? Let's keep going. Okay, so with other grounding studies, it mentioned that grounding contributes to a de-stressing, right? And balancing, again, keywords, right? Effect on the autonomic nervous system with an improvement in heart rate variability. Now, heart rate variability plays a vital role in determining one's risk for possible future cardiac events. Again, we're talking about cardiovascular health and cardiovascular disease. Okay. Now, heart rate fluctuations with emotions, physical activity, medications, food, and even with electromechanical pollution. So what they're talking about, the electromechanical pollution, they're talking about positive ionization. Positive ionization is the bad stuff for you, okay? Which when we're not grounded, we're a closed loop, closed circuit, and we embody stuff and it just circulates through our physiology, creating oxidation damage and inflammation, right? So this is why, in nutritional world, why they really herald antioxidants, anti-inflammatories, right, to negate those effects. But those effects, oxidation, inflammation, are there because you're simply not presenting your natural state. Okay? Right? Again, it's a regulating process where we need to be in balance. Okay? Because the precursor of how our body expresses, behaves, and functions is the state we provide it, the environment. Okay? And our state, our environment, we forge that by the choices we make in each and every moment. And we want the heart, which is our soul consciousness, through feel, not thought, to intuitively and instinctively guide those choices of attention, intention. This is how we forge our energy to provide the very environment and state that our body relies on, because it follows that. Okay? And it's not about things from the outside coming in. It's all based on you, your choices. Okay? So when we become more self-aware of those choices, we can start to direct them in the direction that then supports the state that supports the body, right? To keep things in balance, keep things flowing. Okay? Let's look. So Dr. Stephen Sinatra, who did this research, he's done a number of studies which, improved blood flow, reduced blood viscosity. So we're talking about, again, the thickness of the blood. And he always used to say, through earthing and grounding, you essentially turn your blood from ketchup to red wine, right? So from a thick state, inflamed state, to an anti-inflammatory state and a flowing state, right? Now, all of this is far more important than worrying about cholesterol. Okay? It's way more important than anything you're going to put into your mouth. Okay? Trust me. Because are you eating in every moment? Are you drinking in every moment you exist? You're not, are you? But are you placing your attention and using your intention in each and every moment? Yes. And that's what then forges the very environment state that your body is predetermined by. Right? Whether you have a predetermined to promote inflammation or to promote anti-inflammation, to promote illness or to promote wellness and vitality. It's all based on that, right? Because I've seen so many people try and do it with diet, try and do it with all these things, and struggle to gain the momentum or traction for the results, the outcomes they're looking for. And why that is the case is because they're missing the first step, the foundation, which is they're not presenting their natural state, right? I use an analogy often that see everything you're doing, whether in regards to nutrition, supplementation, acts of doing like meditation or cold plunging or infrared sauna, colonics, those sorts of things. See that as a boulder, okay? But if you're not presenting your natural state, right, you're always up here. You're having to, this boulder's good for you, but man, is it hard to gain any momentum and traction to the result you want because you're having to push that boulder uphill, literally uphill. Everything is against you in regards to fulfilling what this boulder can provide you. But if you present your natural state, all you need to do with that boulder, now it's not uphill, it's downhill. You just have to tap it, and it rolls down effortlessly without any help. It's effortless. It's easy. And it's all about providing your natural state. Okay, let's have a look. In one of Dr. Steve Sinatra's studies, a cardiologist, he mentions about in one particular study, participants relaxed for 2 hours while being grounded. Because you got to remember, they're being grounded, but they're relaxed. They're not in the act of doing, they're being. Okay? They found there was an astonishing 273% reduction in blood viscosity. Which is, what I mean by that, they're shifting thick blood into thin blood, and thin blood is when each red blood cell has that spin rate, that zeta potential, that self-regulating process to keep itself clean, and the blood flows, moves through the body as it's supposed to, right? So it can remineralize, reoxygenate the tissue, okay? That's huge, right? So he talks about another study in 2008, and this is, again, as I say, 2008, that's 17 years ago, right? The science that supports grounding earthing has been around for a while now, and we're not seeing this on the news, are we? Right? Now, in the 2008 study, it was reported on the zeta potential I was talking about before, right? That spin rate of red blood cells in patients with diabetes, right? So they found that, yes, a risk factor was an issue with zeta potential of each red blood cell and its association to what we perceive or what we experience as diabetes, right? So that's exactly backing up my claim I was talking about earlier, that when the red blood cell doesn't have that spin rate, that's a big problem of why the sugar can't get into the cell through the membrane, right? And when it can't, the body just tells, hey, pancreas, secrete more insulin, right? And after a while, that gets tired out. And that person that was once on type 2 diabetes and was on something like metformin, right, to try and create more insulin sensitivity to cells, eventually their pancreas gives up on them, and then they're now having to take insulin as well, inject insulin. Crazy stuff, you know? Okay. Now, another thing they talk about diabetes, they talk about abnormal glucose levels are often related to excess cortisol release. Now, cortisol, which is often known as our stress hormone, secreted by the adrenal glands, right, that sit on top of the kidneys, that's all based on an unregulated nervous system, right? Because when our nervous system's imbalanced, we're more overwhelmed and stressed, more cortisol secretion. And it's been well documented that, right, when we secrete more cortisol, it shuts down our immune system and it shuts down our digestive system. So this is where people are so overwhelmed by an illness or a problem that's, for example, say cancer, and they go through the nutritional route and they're eating a clean diet. They're not getting the result. Excuse me. They're not getting the results they're looking for. Why? Because it doesn't matter what they put in their mouth. They're providing such a state where cortisol is being secreted so much that their digestive system's shut down. It can't even break down and assimilate good food. Okay? And that's all based on the state you're providing. Because if you're up here and you're not presenting your natural state, what does that do? It creates a cascade of effect where the nervous system becomes imbalanced, unregulated, which then the next domino to hit is then the adrenals secrete cortisol, create and secrete cortisol, huge amount of it, right? So again, it all comes back to the state you present, okay? Right, I think we're coming to the end of it. There's another chapter here mentioning grounding supports energy production. Energy production. Now, when I talk to my clients about, hey, when you present your natural state, right, facilitate everything you are is what you infinitely, authentically are, right? Soul consciousness. You are presenting every highest potential of every frequency there is, which is the foundation of every element that's on the periodic table of the elements, every vitamin, every mineral, every nutrient we know, just through presenting your natural state. So when you master your ability to get this open, facilitate this, does your number one source of all those nutrients, all those things you believe your body needs is food anymore? No, it's not. The number one source is just through presenting your natural state. This is why my soul consciousness is all it keeps telling me. Chris, the body knows what to do. All your role needs to be is to present your natural state. And then the body will do what it knows what to do best. But when we're a mind, thought, mentality, which is more ego-driven, we believe that our body lacks and struggles and we need to intervene and do to correct it. Which, of course, when we're doing that, we're not presenting our natural state. And now we're presenting a state that supports inflammation, supports overwhelm and stress. And we lose our flow. And this is why we have the statistics that cardiovascular disease is the number one killer of humans, and it has been for decades. Why cancer is the number 2 killer, and it's been that way for decades. Why mental illness, 1 in 4 people will be clinically diagnosed with a mental illness, and that's clinically diagnosed. Majority of people don't go to their doctor to be clinically diagnosed. So the stats will be even worse than that. This is all based on the way we are perceiving and processing reality from mind, thought, mentality, because it does not present our natural state. And it does not connect with the natural state of the earth, which leave us feeling at conflict with ourselves. We project that conflict into the world. We always feel at unease, which is the word to be diseased. It's all connected. Okay? Anyway, I hope you really enjoyed this live. Some of the information I've presented through this report, this study. in regards to grounding and earthing, but I hope I've been really able to provide the insight that it all comes back, and it's all, the focal point is you and you presenting your natural state. Because if you don't have that foundation, you can't build upon without a foundation. Because we all get taught to be up here, we don't provide our foundation, which is our natural state. It has to be our priority, right? Okay? And it's a lot simpler way to provide what you're looking for. So if you're interested in booking a session with me at Truly Holistic for either healing or reality coaching, which we go into further insight like this, go to my appointment page at trulyholistic.net/appointments/ and you'll see those options there. I've got a YouTube channel. Go and check me out on YouTube, which is simply called Truly Holistic. I think there's over 550 videos on there, so go and check it out. You'll love it. Subscribe to the channel. Until next time, catch you later.